Hi everyone, welcome to Shane and John's podcast with me, Shane Clark, and my very good friend, author, poet, therapist, Mr. John Fletcher. Hey John.
Hello, good to see you.
Nice to see you too, pal. How are you getting on?
I'm getting on fine, thank you. This is the first time I've done a podcast, so I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. It's me who's nervous, not you, innit, John?
Exactly.
Okay, what you want to do this podcast for, John?
Well, the best way to answer that question is to tell you about a crisis that came into my life, which meant I had to change my job very quickly. And I ended up doing a job where I was facilitating people reliving their birth. Now, the reason I was doing that was because I'd basically had a bad time on the farm. A chemical had made me very ill. And in the end, I decided I'd have to leave. So I was in touch with this doctor. I'll tell you why later. But I was in touch with the doctor and I was just chatting with him saying I was going to have to go back to teaching. And he said, well, you don't have to. You can come and work for me. So I ended up going to work for him. He said at the beginning as a research assistant, but it didn't last long as a research assistant. I ended up doing therapy work with him and actually helping people a lot of the time relive their birth and even towards the end, reliving things prior to their birth. Mm-hmm. Now, when I first started to work for him, two other really amazing and important things happened to me, which made me want to do this podcast. One was that one of my first clients when I was working for the doctor was a lady called Jean Liedloff, who'd just come back from spending 3 years living with a Stone Age tribe in the Amazon jungle. Now, she'd come back from there telling us all about how they lived and how she was particularly keen on how they brought up their babies. And as you might expect, the mum had the baby with her basically for the first 2 years of life. And she got the feeling that close contact led to a much more strong, stable, emotional being than she's used to finding amongst Western people. So that was that. The people that I've been doing therapy with the doctor, most of them were of my generation, and they were used to a regime where once they were born, they would not be with mum. They would be in a nursery. Mum would be supposed to be getting her rest, and they were separated. And the consequence of that was that a lot of them were in terrible terror, pain, anguish. This isn't how it's supposed to be. I'm supposed to, and they were. When I say we did this rebirthing, we weren't talking about it. They were actually on the floor, on a mat with cushions around, and the rest of the group around them providing the uterus. I was providing the birth canal, and I was delivering them. And so many of them had this feeling of terrible abandonment after they were born. And this was, of course, not at all the experience of the Stone Age tribe people. Indeed, with the Stone Age tribe, if a baby screamed or cried, it was quite likely that they would react as if a grown-up had, when someone screams and cries, it's an emergency, you do something. So you didn't find so she said, amongst the Stone Age tribe that babies were crying in discomfort. They might chortle and, do all the other things that babies do. But if they were crying, something was done about it straight away. No. So what's important there is the baby had power to get people to do things. I'll talk about that more later, because I want to mention the other thing that happened around this time, which was that my wife gave birth to our twins prematurely. Now, all those three things happened together. And when she gave birth to the twins prematurely, there was obviously surgical procedure involved in that. And they were put into, they weren't in incubators exactly, but they were in plastic containers. So can you imagine how I felt in those circumstances? I knew about the anguish of all these people of my generation. And I knew from Jean Liedloff about the way it should be. And there was me with my twin boys in plastic containers. And I was told, oh, you can put your hand through the porthole and touch them, but that's all you can do. And these kids, these two boys, I mean, I did try, whenever I visited, I'd put my hand in and tried to get a response, but they were just like this all the time. They were alive, but there was no life, They just had these thin plastic tubes that went up their noses and down for the food the milk to get to them. Oh. Which was, pumped from Helen's breast to
no
them.
human touch whatsoever.
But after 3 days, I couldn't stand it any longer, and I talked to my wife about this, and I said, "We can't go on like this." And in the end, I had a word with the staff sister, the sister in charge of the ward. I said, "We're going to take them home." She said, "Well, this is totally against our advice if you do this. If you do, you'll have to sign a form saying you're taking them out against medical advice." And I'm not a doctor, I'm not. I was a lay person. I was being trained by this doctor in therapy work, but I didn't have any other qualification other than being an English teacher. But at the same time, I had all this knowledge suddenly, this experience, and I thought, we've got to do it. And one of the things we were told was that because they're premature, they won't be able to control their temperature. But thank God it was a warm August month they were born. Plus, I had another client who was a pediatrician. I mean, it couldn't have been better circumstances for me to make this decision, even though it was hard to sign, signing on the dotted
Against
line.
all everybody's advice.
Yeah. So we did it, and we had them home. Helen, my wife, had them in our double bed 24/7. I kid you not, within 24 hours, you could see muscle shape in their legs. They were moving around, chortling, and Helen fed them, bless her, whenever they wanted. It was interestingly, people talk about feeding on demand. I don't like that phrase. It sounds like, demand, you're going to have to do this. It's feeding at need. That's the key phrase, really, feeding at need, and that's what she did. And that's what, to me, was the really, really important aspect of that. And it led me to want to make this podcast because from my own experience seeing this, I realized how the truth of what Jean Liedloff was telling us about bonding, and also the opposite of not bonding, which I'd witnessed from my clients. So from that, I was aware that, this really works, and we have to do something to change the way people behave around. And there has been some movement, there has been some progress, but as I'll tell you later, not nearly enough, not really.
Okay, and then you mentioned the doctor.
Yes.
Who's the doctor? How did you come to it with him?
Right. Well, the doctor was Dr. Frank Lake. You can find him on, if you search him, you'll find the name. And he founded something called clinical theology, which meant the application of psychotherapeutic techniques and so on within the context of a Christian belief, which he had. I don't have a belief like
Explain that a bit more in depth, John.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Explain
what he actually does. What does that mean?
Well, what it meant for him was that the passion and death of Christ was is God's way of telling us that he shared all of our feelings. He shared the extremes of abuse and forsakenness and abandonment. He faced all those things. He's telling us that whatever we face, he's faced it as well. And that when we re-own, if you have a trauma, you bury it and it stays buried in your system. If you re-own that, he will share it. He's sharing it with you, if you like.
And what's different to where you look at it?
Well, I believed that it needed to come out and be shared, but I didn't necessarily feel that a spiritual sharing was enough. Particularly when I did my own therapy, I felt very much that I wanted a flesh and blood person or people to relate to afterwards. And I'll come back to this later, but basically that was the difference between us.
Right.
That I felt, no, it's okay for some people who have a very firm, steady faith in Christ to think, okay, I've got his companionship. That's all I need to stay with this abandoned child inside me and be okay with it.
How long did you work with Frank?
It was nearly 3 years in total. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then that came to an end.
Yeah.
Did it, and then.
But before, can I just talk a little bit about the work with him, because it's important to what I want to say later. And while I was with him, one of the other things that I came home to me very much, which I think is very important to share with people, is that for a lot of the things that go on, there is often another layer to what's going on. And the good indication of that is where you overreact to something. You know, you might like to just look back yourself now. You don't have to tell me, but just look back over your recent past and think, are there any situations I've been in recently where my reaction has been a bit out of proportion to the situation? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I can think of one for you at the moment.
I'm thinking of a few, John.
Yeah. And the one for me, which comes up quite frequently, just to give you an illustration, is when I'm driving along in my car and I encounter a cyclist. Now, I really hate cyclists. I really hate them with a passion. And I know that my reaction to being slightly delayed in my journey, because this cyclist won't use the blooming path, he's using the road, my reaction and my feelings towards him are a lot more than he deserves. So what's going on? And I'm being honest with myself, because I've done quite a lot of this work on myself. I know that the underlying reason for that is that because of my back injury, I can't be one of those cyclists. I can't be one of these smart guys on a posh bike with all the Lycra gear and all. Can't do that anymore. And that's where most of the anger comes from. So that's what I'm talking about. There's another layer very often. And what I found was very therapeutic for most of the people I worked with Dr. Lake. And I did work somewhat differently, because I used to say to them, tell me about this. Tell me about some recent overreaction to a situation. Or what is the prevailing difficult situation in terms of your feelings at the moment? And to give you one, I suppose for me and for the people in the group I was working with, when I worked with Frank, we didn't work very much one-to-one. It was mainly groups who would come for 6 days, residential, and we worked through each of them in turn while the others sat around and supported. They didn't just sat around passively and wait their turn. They were supporting each other. And as the 6 days went on, they became more and more supportive of one another. So it became like, if only the world could be like this, if only the world could, because they came from all over the world. If we could put people in these situations, the world would be a very different place. But anyway, one of the most graphic, memorable episodes of this was a lady who talked about being very lonely at work. So we got her to describe the workplace that she worked in. And she worked in a high-rise office block. How many floors up, I don't know, but it was just one floor. And she was a kind of secretary, receptionist person. And she would come in, her hours started before the men who went into their offices round about. But she had a sort of central place, which is surrounded by glass, a kind of glass wall around it. And the men would come in to go to their offices and would wave to her, say good morning, go into their offices, and then all the rest of the communication would be via the internal telephone at the time. This is, before mobile phones and stuff. So she was kind of there. They were in their rooms, and there was this sort of glass screen, and she just felt so lonely. But she said, I really feel very, very lonely here. So I said, okay, well, now you've got this support around you, let's just explore this feeling of loneliness that you have. Can you go into it more? Just breathe a bit more. Sometimes I used to find people would try not to breathe because they were defending against feeling things. So I said, you're safe here. let yourself breathe more, do more diaphragmatic breathing, let the breathing happen. And then just start to make a little bit of a sound out as you're breathing. And she did just, after a bit of resistance to begin with, she started to really start to feel it. And you could hear it in her voice, the sort of moaning and feeling it. And then she really went for it and slid off her chair onto the mat, which we always had a mat on the floor. And she was kind of rolling around, really. Obviously, she'd regressed quite young. By the look of her, it looked about 4 or 5, something like that. And then she started crying out, Isuka, 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 like this. And we looked at each other, what the heck is that? We had no idea what she was talking about. Anyway, so she carried on with this for quite some time. And then eventually, as these things do, they have a kind of life of their own and a natural ending. And she came to the end of this really strong grieving, tears pouring down her face and all the rest of it. And she came sort of back up to her present day age, if you like. She'd obviously regressed to about 4 or 5 and come back. And she went and sat in her chair, and we sat around while she sort of got back to herself. And then I said, you must tell us, what does Isuka mean? And she said, oh, Isuka, that's Finnish for daddy. Right, so she was grieving about daddy. So what happened? So she said, oh, well, when first 5 years of my life, we lived in Finland, and my father was Finnish. But my mother didn't like me to have any contact with father. She was suspicious of his relationship with me. So I didn't have any contact with him properly. And at 5 years old, she totally finished with him. We came to England, I learned English, and I spoke English ever since. And obviously, and she wouldn't let me mention daddy. Daddy was off limits to talk about. So I never got to feel this grief that I've just shown all of you folks, So she felt it. And then I said, well, she was obviously feeling a lot better having got it out. And then I said to her, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I've noticed that I noticed this on the first evening when you came, that your eyes were quite different. One eye was kind of normal and lively and crinkled up when you smiled and all that. And the other eye didn't seem to make any kind of expression at all. It seemed slightly more bulbous than this eye, but they're now both the same. Suddenly, your face looks different. And I looked around to the other people and I said, have you noticed this? And they said, well, yeah, but we weren't going to say anything, it'd be offensive. So I said, we can say it now, can't you? Because they're both normal, aren't they? And she looked at us all kind of bemused. What? How come? Nobody's ever mentioned it to her before. And then she suddenly gave a gasp and said, my father had a glass eye.
Wow. So that was connected to it.
So that was her way of staying somehow, subconsciously, in touch with her dad.
Amazing.
And there was a fairy tale end to this story because she contacted her dad, traced him in Finland, went to see him, and they got together, and all was fine.
Okay, when she shouted that name, say that again.
Isuka.
Does she know she's saying that at that time when she's regressed?
Yeah, she's regressed. So, she knows exactly.
She knows exactly what's going on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you asked her, she knew she'd said that.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because it's very important that people know the context of their feelings. If they just sprawl out and like they did in encounter groups and things, if they just cry and scream and stuff, they don't know what they're screaming about. It hasn't got a context. It's not healing.
Okay. So, and after all that's happened, how do you deal with her now? How do you do a follow up on her and check that she's okay and it's not? Obviously you're with her then, aren't you? Yeah. And you check she's okay and all that. And then you do a follow-up with them and make sure everything's okay. Obviously they'd let you know.
I'm afraid all we did then, because I wasn't working for myself, and I would put all those follow-up things in place now from what I know, but we didn't then. But we did. We had we were on the phone. We were available for further appointments, further conferences, further workshops. People didn't just come once. Sometimes they came 2 or 3 times. But the idea was Frank had begun, because it had a sort of Christian start to it and his Christian take on it all. They were expected to go back to the support of their local churches. Yeah. But of course, as I quickly realized, the local churches couldn't give the level of support that was needed. If they'd gone to Gene Liedloff's tribe, they would have, because they'd had a lot of physical contact, right, which is what people need on a basic level. They need a lot of physical contact. In Gene Liedloff's tribe, even though they've had 24/7 with mum for 2 years, even when they're grown up, they're still grooming each other, sitting with each other in the hammocks. And so she noticed that there's a lot of touchy-feely went on all the time. Yeah. And interestingly enough, another interesting fact about that time that she had was that the men, when they had to go out and deal with other tribes, and keep them off their territory, or whether they went hunting and got injured or whatever, they would be brave guys out there. But when they came back to their families, they were crying like babies. If someone gashed their knee or whatever it was, they didn't feel the need to be big guys anymore. They did when they were warriors or hunters, but not when they were back home. Yeah. They had that balance. They felt, that's part of being a human being is to have these feelings, not to bottle them up.
Well, they're getting therapy then, aren't they? Without them really knowing it, they're getting it off the tribe, aren't they?
Yeah. But can I give you another example from just another highlight from my work to just emphasize this idea that there are other levels of stuff, like, this lady had the lonely workplace, but she also had the lonely feeling that she, had to keep away from her father. So there were other people who had that kind of thing. And as I say, we had people from all walks of life. And there was one guy particularly who was a plumber, and he came with his wife, and his wife really had to get him to come because, a lot of guys are more resistant to therapy than women are. It still seems to be the case, unfortunately. I'm not making any kind of, I'm not making a negative statement about men. I'm just saying that what I've noticed in my own experience has been the case. And anyway, they both came, and they're very worried because, just like me with a cyclist, he was the same with a supplier. He wanted to murder the so-and-sos if they didn't supply his pipes or his valves or whatever he needed to go and do whatever job he needed to do. I mean, obviously, there is some tension in that. If you've got a job in hand and your supplier lets you down, big deal. But it's not life and death, But for him, it was. And she said, we're losing supplier after supplier because he's so terrible with them when they miss out, Okay, so we took him through his birth, as it turned out, and we started off with a supplier. I like to start with the present. And we took it down the layers through the breathing and everything. And
go through the layers, John. You make him feel comfortable, don't you?
Yeah, you make him feel comfortable. You've got a group of other people around him. He's told his story about how he feels when suppliers don't perform, and I got him to go into the feeling more thoroughly.
But you said he's in cushions, he's all comfortable, he's got people around him.
Yeah, that's right. That's it.
Yeah, he's in a safe, secure environment.
And I'm at the head end, Okay. I'm providing with my hands, I provide the birth canal.
Yeah. And you've had permission, as you said, you told me before, that you're allowed to touch them and all that, they all understand what's going to happen, so they feel safe before.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's all that, yeah. And then he went through it, and about halfway through the struggle to be born, he suddenly said, he broke out of it. It hadn't happened to me before. He totally broke out of it. Said, "You've all let me down. You've all let me down. I'm not doing this anymore. Georgia, we're going home," whatever her name was. "I'm not doing this." And we just said, "Okay, do you want to go out and just come back after a short while?" We sort of didn't say, "Okay, buzz off," So after a bit, he did come back in, and he went down again, and he went on through it. But he realized he'd made the connection that this let down wasn't us, because we were still there with our cushions. It wasn't us, and I was still there at this head. It was that his mum giving birth, the uterus had got exhausted and had collapsed on him. So suddenly he had no kind of purchase in order to push himself through. And he felt, I'm going to die here. And underneath all that escalated anger that he felt to the suppliers was this terror that I'm trapped. I can't get out. I've had it. And that's one of the problems, is that's why this overreaction is such a powerful thing, because if you're overreacting and you're in touch on some level with some early feelings, they're life and death, because you haven't got any kind of reference. A tiny infant has no sense of time. It's now or it's never,
Yeah.
My mum's here, she's not here. It's not like she'll come back in 10 minutes. What's 10 minutes to, it's life and death. And that's why it's so powerful.
And before people do the rebirthing, are most people apprehensive, before they try it? Because obviously they've had therapy before they go back to the rebirthing.
Yeah.
And it hasn't helped. Is it people worried about trying it, John? Like I've spoke to you before, haven't I?
Yeah,
about
you said it like opening a can of worms.
Is that a general feeling of people?
Yes. Yeah, and more so now than it was when we were doing it, actually. There's much less. When we were doing it, it was the late 70s. People were, wanting to explore themselves, people were wanting fame and, riches, and they wanting to be fulfilled and explore their mental potential, even to taking acid and stuff, let's see where this goes. There was a much more exploratory, open-minded feel then. But even so, people were scared, and it is scary to start off. What would happen was that the brave ones would be the ones to go first. Right. In these 6-day workshops, and then the scared ones would see the safety of it, and they would follow on later
gradually.
On. But what I always found was that if I talked about this stuff to people, I always found that the people who'd never witnessed it, never seen it, didn't believe it. Right. Didn't believe it at all. It's a fantasy. They're acting a part and all that. But once people had done it, they always said almost the same thing, every one of them. They would say, I don't know how I got there so easily. All I did was this breathing. You taught me to do this breathing. How did it happen so easily? And quite often I would say to them, they all say that. Because it's not that far below the surface, actually. Right. We hold it down with coffee and beer and whatever else we use, to keep ourselves calm. All the self-help books will help you keep calm. That's what they're designed to do. But if you want to get real healing, you've got to go where the problem really is. And Frank Lake had this wonderful phrase I felt was really very telling. He said, what our business here is to take these wounds, which we've all got, out of our eternity, in other words, there all the time, forever, and put them into our history. You see, for that Finnish woman, it's a memory now. It's not something that's still churning her guts with pain of grief, not knowing her father. It's not there anymore. It's a memory. It was in her eternity. It's now in her history. And that was our aim for everyone, to get them to that point where it's no longer, causing that problem. Unfortunately, I can't cure my back, so I'm still going to get angry when I see cyclists. But, in a sense, I know what that's about. So in a way, I'm able to deal with it in an understanding way. I understand the child in me. I say, oh, yeah, I understand you want to be on the bike, but you can't. I can be nice to myself in that respect. But yeah. And there's one other thing I wanted to mention too, which also has people unnerved, and that is role play. Quite often at the end of a workshop, we would do a role play, and it's really it actually cuts down a lot of time, because when you see people enroll in a relationship, in a family situation, like with a parent or a partner or whatever, when you see them in role doing it, you pick up a lot of cues that they're not going to tell you.
Right.
You know, they're not going to tell you things, but you can see the way they stand, the way they give them a cup of coffee even, you know, it can be. I remember a guy coming to me and say, be careful how you hand out the exercise books when you're teaching. You know, if you give a book, exercise book back, this is, you know, before laptops. If you give an exercise book back with both hands like that, say that was a wonderful piece of work. It's very different from just chucking it to the desk. That's yours. That's your, you know, that was a beautiful little clue I got there, you know, for that. So role play, really important. And I did one particular one, which moved me greatly, actually. We did this thing called old self, new self, where we'd say to them, right, who's the trigger person in your life who really bugs you the most, humiliates you, gets you overreacting? And who is it? You can think about someone now if you like. Anyway, if you do that, you then get someone to play your old self, how it normally goes. And you get them to play a little play where the trigger person, as we call him, the one who triggers you off, the trigger person and you are together, you're having a meeting. You might be in his office, you might be in your kitchen, you might be up in the bedroom. Where's the scene? And you have this. It's amazing how quickly total strangers will tune in and get the hang of that's how it goes, you know. And then you get someone else in the group to play the new you that's done the work, you know, and no longer has to be like that. And you get them to play it that way. And a guy got me to play his trigger person. Normally, I'm just the leader and I watch them do it, you know, but he said, would you be the trigger person? And the trigger person was his father. His father was a farmer. Are you okay with this?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, his father was a farmer and he'd become a priest himself. You know, that's how he got the connection with Frank. And he wanted to confront his father for molesting him as a young boy.
Right.
It does happen. So, wow,
you're playing his dad?
I'm the molester.
Right. Okay.
And he's gone up to the farm just to speak to him and confront him about it. He doesn't say it straight off when he arrives, but they get together. He starts talking, and I say to him, the sort of things you're talking about make me kind of cross. What do I do? He said, he'd probably go and poke the fire. Well, there was no fire there, but I went, you know, and did the actions of poking a fire. And then the thing developed a bit, and he said, what will he do now? He said, knowing him, he'd probably just go and look out of the window. So I said, okay. So I went over to the wall. There was no window there. But what there was a picture by Van Gogh of fields. So suddenly, I was his dad looking at my fields. And I fed back to him how I felt. And I was really close to tears. And I was saying to him, do you know, I'm just feeling really, really lonely here. Your mum's died. I was hoping you'd do the farm. You know, it would be down to you that we worked all this my life for. And you don't want the farm either. I just wonder, what the hell am I doing it for? I can feel the tears now. What am I doing this for? And the interesting thing was, he was supposed to be confronting him about this awful thing that happened to him early in life. He suddenly realized, I don't want to do this to this old man now. This isn't right. So suddenly there was a leap from that old feeling to one of compassion for his father, who was now in this very tragic sort of setup, really. And he didn't say anything. He just came. I was still looking at my fields, you know, at the Van Gogh picture, and he just came over to me and just put his hand on my shoulder. And that was all. And I know that doesn't look like a lot, but it really was.
Well, it's a bit forgiving. He's forgiven him there, isn't he?
Yeah. And he realised, it'd be a selfish act. What would be the point? I can deal with this without having to confront this old man with it. It happened so long ago. Mm. And again, a fairy tale end to that one.
Yeah.
We got a letter from the priest to say, he'd done pretty much exactly what he'd done with me, and all was okay. But again, what I'm emphasizing here is not so much the layers, but the fact that if you do role play, it's amazing how much you can empathize with the other person's position.
I did a bit of role playing in probation, John. Only once I've ever done it.
Yeah.
I had to be the shopkeeper.
Yeah.
And then they come in, football hooligans come in and they're abusing you, and you have to try and keep calm. And it didn't last 2 minutes. I was well fuming, even though it was role playing. I felt the anger coming when they were abusing me, even though I knew it was all role playing.
Yeah.
Still felt the same feelings I would have done.
Yeah.
None of that. It's not real. I was like, stop calling me names. Like,
oh right.
So it did feel real. So
yeah.
And majority of times it works. John does it, and you get a good outcome.
Yes.
Is there any bad outcomes? Did anybody have anything negative come from it?
Yes, there would be bound to be, wouldn't there? Really? Yeah. I mean, I remember there was one guy who just really acted his rebirth, and it wasn't real. Yeah. And I could
tell
you can't. Your body can't lie. You can lie with your expressions of your face and your voice and all the rest of it, but doing a whole body experience, you can't really lie. And the rest of the group felt the same. There wasn't the same vibe there. And interestingly, I haven't mentioned this guy before, but there was Arthur Janov was the guy who really discovered the primal scream and wrote a book called The Primal Scream, and developed a therapy called primal therapy, which he licensed, and no one else could do it under that title. So the work that we did was early trauma regression therapy, which was going into the same areas, but not under that label. Mm. But he did an amazing job, no doubt about it. And one of the things he did was he teamed up with a guy called Michael Holden, who was a neurologist, and they actually put sensors and wires on people's heads and stuff, and they were able to measure the vital signs of people going through rebirthing and put it on graphs and do all the rest of it. And they could actually see false primal, real primal, because of the different vital signs.
Right.
Yeah. Apparently, if it's a false primal, if the vital signs are all high at the end. If it's a real primal, they're all lower than normal at the end. And actually, it led them to say that what we regard as an average is actually a bit high, because we're all, in Western society, we're all tense. Right. So we're all, the average is higher than it should be. The baseline is slightly lower than we have as our average. And some people say that's why, I don't know whether this is true, but they say you seem young for your age. If you do primal work or do regression therapy work, it does sort of arrest the aging process to some extent. Right. Yeah. So anyway, it's important that people know that we can tell the difference between a false primal or a false regression and a real one.
And what would be the reason for someone to go to act?
To act a false one?
What would be their reasoning in that? They're trying their best for it to be real, or they want to be part of the group?
There's a whole, you've mentioned a couple, there's a whole raft of reasons, but I think the ones you've mentioned are the main ones. And sometimes it's out of malice. They want to just make a fool of you as the therapist. Right. That happened to me once, but it didn't work because, it didn't work. Yeah. Nobody bought it, as you might say. But he was obviously, he wanted to discredit the whole business, and he didn't succeed.
But when it does work, it's a great feel of achievement, John, helping someone. And they've actually, it's worked.
But that brings me to the really important thing I want to put across today to you today is that with Frank and with Janov and all the pioneers in this field, the sad truth of them, it hasn't saved the world, has it?
No.
Now,
Well, I did say to you the other day, John, that in work it's all talking about mental health issues and being there for each other.
Yeah.
There's no classes, there's no time put in where you have days off and you have all sit and talk and help each other. But it's just say keep an eye on each other. If you see someone who's a bit low, have a chat. So it's all lip service, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's they say the right things, the right posters on the wall.
Yeah.
But there's no time or finance or effort put into making sure people are not having mental health issues.
Well, this is exactly what the other point I want to get to is that what I realized, and I think I remember Googling it not long ago, just inquiring about what had happened to primal therapy. And somebody had said on Google, not me, somebody had said on Google that there was a misconception. And the misconception is, and in fact, Jean Liedloff refers to it in the introduction to her book. Her book is called The Continuum Concept. And the introduction to the latest edition of that, she says that this reemergence of the feelings on its own is not healing. And she's right. What it does is give you the opportunity to heal it. But in order to heal it, your present circumstances have to be those where you're in a nurturing relationship of some kind. Either you've got a very caring partner who's understanding and will be caring of you through this, or you've got a group around you of people, like in a church or some other equivalent
knowing
group.
The reason isn't enough. You've got to work on the reason when you find out what the problem is.
Well, you're there. I mean, for example, if yours is a case of being abandoned early on in infancy, and you relive that. If you're living in a lonely bedsit in London, you've made everything worse. You've just reinforced the problem. So it can go bad in that way. So it's dangerous in that sense. But if you're in a situation now where you've got a meaningful relationship with people who will support you, not be fair weather friends and go away when you're in trouble, we'll be there for you. If you do have that, then you can heal. And the thing is, just having the nurturing group isn't enough. Having the therapy isn't enough. Put the two things together and you save the world. And that is the only way we will save the world, is if people get together in tribal-sized groups and get back to behaving like our evolution prompts us to behave. Yeah. Only then, with using the therapy to get the wounds out, we can then really, you can't do it by persuasion. You can't say, look, we all love you. What's the matter with you? It's not good enough. You've got to find out what is the matter with them, help them reveal that so that we don't have every generation taking baggage on to the next generation.
And you feel like a lot of it, John, is not that connection as a childhood with the mother and losing that.
Yeah.
And if that was worked on now, in a couple of generations down the line, hopefully all those mental health issues from that will have been lost, wouldn't they? Because they've had it all now. Yeah. But it won't work straight away. It's got to be generational, doesn't it? And start now.
The crazy thing is, we'd all be much happier people, like the Stone Age people are happy.
Yeah. Because you feel like mothers could take the children to work with them and be with them more as a toddler stage, don't you? You feel that's lost, don't you?
I do. I feel that we've come some way because of the work that Frank did and I did and other people like us were doing. There is more bonding and skin contact immediately after birth, but it doesn't last long enough. And not only that, but you do get still the business of, and I know this because I've got colleagues at school where I work now who don't do what they did in the tribes. They don't have the baby there all the time. And the crucial problem with it for me, which is really important, I think this is something which I'm bringing new to it, is that, well, I won't be the only one, but there aren't enough of us saying this, that the infant, we talk a lot these days about women having rights. And of course, historically, they've been badly treated and still are today. We know that. But infants have rights. Infants have rights. And they need to know they have power. So that when a mum has a baby, and the baby is constantly with her, and the baby wants to be fed, the mother feeds the baby. And the babies let her know this. The baby feels, I've got the power to get what I need. If the mother is putting the baby into care, is putting the baby in another room, is putting the baby in a crib, by the bed even, and there's no contact, and the baby isn't able to get that contact, can't smell the mother, it hasn't got the heartbeat near and all that kind of thing, and can't get it, then the baby feels powerless. The more that there is what we used to call schedule feeding when I was an infant myself, the more the mother imposes what is called intermittent nursing. In other words, it's not all there all the time, at need, as I would say, not on demand, at need. When it's not there all the time, the baby will feel dominated, imposed upon, humiliated. All those kind of feelings will be what the baby feels. And it's my belief, and I don't know who else is saying this, but it needs saying, I think that's one of the reasons why that domination that is experienced by babies who are intermittently fed is reversed by men when they become strong enough and old enough to dominate and control the woman. Now, it seems to me
that as an adult, it's trying to get back what it didn't have as a child,
or revenge or something.
Revenge, right.
There could be that in it as well. But the problem is that these days people, go on about how badly men behave towards women, right? But they don't really ask the question, why are they like this? Apparently, according to Jared Diamond, who's worked with tribes in New Guinea and all over the place, who incidentally echo the story that Jean tells us. It's not like she's a one-off with one tribe. It's all of the tribes. The men and women are kind of egalitarian with each other. There isn't a kind of sense of domination of one over the other. They have different roles a lot of the time. But even the women sometimes will go hunting with the baby on the back.
Yeah, you mentioned it. Amazing.
Yeah. And
as you said, and the men will come back and cry in front of the women after being out.
Exactly. Yeah. And yes, good point. Yeah. So there is much more of a kind of egalitarian feel about how men and women should be with each other and how they are in those tribes. Now, why are they like that in those tribes and not here? Why are we having men doing this, raping and dominating and abusing? And, you hear these horrible stories about things going on in police forces and other organizations where the misogyny is going on. And why are men getting at women like this? What's driving that? It's like me with the cyclist. There's something else going on there. And I think this is it. I think it's this domination that they've received, this feeling of, I can't get what I need. I've got no power. She's not coming. There's no sense of time. It's for eternity, this. She's not coming to me. They're able to reverse that when they're adults. And if we're able to get back to continuous nursing rather than intermittent.
And ideally, how would we get back to that from the position we're in now, John? How would we get to that?
Well, I am encouraged by what I've heard about certain companies. Some companies are trying to do a lot more to enable women to go back to work with their babies. Google, I think, is one of those, making lots of provision. And I think Netflix are doing something as well. And a number of firms, I think it's more starting to happen in America than it is over here.
I think the more opportunity women got to have that to be able to do that, I think they would, wouldn't they? To say, it might be a bit strange at first for them, but I think a lot of women would like to have
they would kind of fall into it, being, this is kind of how it should be, sort of thing, Because I was talking to my colleague at school who'd recently had a baby, and she said, it's kind of strange, isn't it? I'm here at school and she's in care. Well, what's going on? It's really, what am I doing? She actually, when I brought this topic up, she sort of questioned herself, what am I doing?
She's in work and the baby's in nursery.
Yeah, it just seemed...
And those years what matter, the first few years really matter.
Yeah, and I think we should get to the point where everybody's attitude is, we're here not just for us, but we're here for the next generation. So if there's a woman at the checkout with a baby on her back and the baby needs to feed, well, you're just going to have to bloody well wait. It's this child's conditioning for her whole life. Here, you're just waiting, your shopping's being delayed by 20 minutes. It's tough. This is a whole life's conditioning going on here. So just wait. That should be our attitude, And if you're going to, after all, you hear about women in rice fields, they've got children on their backs. Why can't they have children on their backs in a bank?
Yeah.
Or in a boardroom. In fact, they do in America. Some of them take what's called a Moby, which is a kind of cradle thing around their stomach, and they go to meetings.
Yeah, and you'd love that to be more common, wouldn't you? And that
it should be going on all the time, and we should all accept it. We should all accept it. Yeah, yeah. And I think that the other thing is in Western society, people talk about putting your life on hold to have a baby. No. You carry on your baby wants you to carry on your life because you'll feel happier, the baby will feel happier, it'll work.
Just have the baby with you.
Yeah, yeah. And the baby's seeing mum doing other stuff apart from being with the baby. She's, doing all kinds of other things. She's living her life. Yeah. You don't put your life on hold, just like a hunter-gatherer they don't put their life on hold. They carry it around. They go foraging with it. They go down to the river to wash stuff with it. It's just the natural thing that we've somehow lost.
Yeah,
and we need to get back. I know a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you just want us to get back to some golden age." Now they're just getting out of what I'm saying. I'm not saying there's been some golden age when the hunter-gatherers were all living in harmony with each other. No, of course they weren't. There were warriors fighting each other for territory, and that kind of thing was going on. What I'm saying is we need to retrieve what we as primates, we're one of a group of primates, need as part of our physiology and our general well-being. Because as, again, Jared Diamond points out in his book, it's called The World Until Yesterday, he's pointing out that primates apart from us, are all continuous nurses. In other words, it's feeding at need. All other primates apart from us. We, because of this part of us, we are the ones who've decided, this has got lost touch with the deeper stuff. We've lost touch to some degree with what's going on down here. We have got fancy ideas about how we're going to live, but we're not keeping in touch with our basic needs. Yeah. And that's the basic problem, is that we are physiologically designed for continuous nursing. But we're imposing intermittent nursing. Now, continuous nursing we did for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, right? This intermittent stuff is what rabbits and antelopes have done for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And they're used to it. Mm-hmm. We have only done it for, a few hundred years? We're not used to it. We haven't got used. We're not antelopes, we're not rabbits. And we've got to go back to behaving like primates in this fundamental way. And I feel that that's the most important thing that I want to get across to people, is for the sake, if I go back to my twin boys and how suddenly they became alive and chortling and friendly. And now
healthy adults now,
as adults now, they've had a lot to put up with in our culture, but they've maintained an integrity and particularly an emotional integrity, which I'm really, really proud of, I couldn't be more so. And there couldn't be more of a proof a living proof of all I'm trying to say here today.
Yeah, you did the right thing taking him out of hospital, John, that's for sure, in hindsight.
Yes, I was very fortunate in the support that was around me at the time, and the fact that it was the summer, because Oliver, the younger one, he did get a bit of jaundice and so on, but we were able to manage it okay. Yeah.
Okay, and then so you worked for Frank. How did that come to an end? Why did the therapy you start working with Frank?
Well, the answer is a simple one, really, in that he got cancer and died, and because I got training within the organization, I was accredited within the organization as a group facilitator and counselor. It was only within the organization, so I didn't have the qualifications. I mean, he had a whole string of them. He was even had a gold medal for surgery, Frank had, and he'd worked in India as a parasitologist and so on, and he went into psychiatry later in life. So he had all that behind him. I didn't, and I wouldn't have had the authority in terms of the public in general to continue the work. Although I did have clients coming to me. I did run some workshops on my own when he went abroad. He went to Australia, he went to Scandinavia, and he went to America doing this work while I sort of minded the shop at home, and the conferences went fine without him. But
and he was a good teacher. He enjoyed working with him, and he was very open to helping you. And
well, I mean, I began working with him because I had serious problems of my own. I mean, my father had died when I was 9 months old of TB, and in the same house that we were living in. So it was quite a difficult start for me, and that had its repercussions later in my life, obviously, and that was how I got to him in the first place. And yes, we.
Do you want to talk about that a bit, John?
There's not a great deal I need to say about it, other than it's because I've been able to get through it eventually, to where I am now. It kind of gives me an inner authority to talk about this. It's not like I'm coming here with some fancy theory I've found. And I'm not coming here without a feeling that, I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, the people who've gone behind me, like Janoff and Frank Lake, these are pioneers in the field, and without them, I wouldn't have been able to make head or tail of my own experience. Whereas I've been able to make head or tail of the experience. They didn't give me the nurturing group that I needed. I had to find that in other ways. But at least I was kept, And
do you think it's a certain individual that it would help, John, as in people that have had therapy and it's not really helped them, so rebirthing would help them that way? Or do you think it can help with most people that have got problems? Regression,
I think it can help most people, so long as, and I know I'm sounding like a stuck record, but so long as there's a caring group around them of some kind. If they have that, then this reliving of stuff is very, very important in order for them to get well. And very often what's so sad is that people get stuck in relationships and they can't manage them. They split up and go their separate ways because they can't find a resolution, because the resolution isn't on the surface layer. It's not what the row that we keep having with each other. It's not really the one that's really the problem. It's another layer down, or even 2 layers down or more. You need to get down to where the fundamental problem is. And then you can get there. I mean, one other example of that was a lady I did what they call empty chair work with, where she was having a problem with her mother, because her mother kept doing her down all the time. We'll call her Katie. Yeah, her mother's doing her down all the time. Her clothing, friends she goes out with, etc., etc. And to the point where it was so damaging that she couldn't leave the house. So she came to us, and we thought, we need to see the mum, So fortunately, they were involved in the church, so we got through to church members, and eventually the mum was persuaded to come pretty much against her will to start with, without the daughter. So we got the mum, okay, and I was given the mum, and we did this empty chair work where I got her to sit in her chair, say to Katie, as if Katie was in the empty chair, okay, you got the picture? Mm-hmm. Yeah, to say to Katie what she would normally say about her friends and her clothing and all the rest of it. And she did. And I then said, okay, to her surprise, I said, okay, now I want to go and sit over in Katie's chair. Now you're Katie. And then I'd remind her of what Mum had said to Katie. I said, okay, Katie, now breathe. Tell me how you're feeling as Katie. How are you feeling about all this? And to begin with, she was just very honest and saying, yeah, it just makes me feel worthless. I'm no good. I feel too shy to go out. Okay. And then she came back and she just went on a hoity-toity high horse again. She should pull herself together and all that kind of thing. But gradually, with a few moves back and forth, suddenly again, there was this moment of recognition. It's not Katie I'm talking to. It's my mum. And actually, it turned out that her mum had treated her this way, and she basically just passed on that pain. And that's what I mean about stopping the passing on of baggage from one generation to the next. That's exactly what she was doing. She was passing on the baggage she had to her daughter. And I didn't tell her. We didn't know this was going to happen. We can't say that the therapist, put this insight into her, planted it. I hadn't a clue. She came out with it. This is my mum. We didn't know anything about her mum. So this was her recognition of this. And the other interesting thing was there were 6 people round listening to this. It was recorded on, these old-fashioned tape recorders, and she couldn't go back on it.
No.
Even though she might have wanted to go back on it later when she came back to it.
It was there.
She wasn't able to go back because it was there. And again, another fairy tale end to that story. But it was very much to do with the role play working, but again, finding the right layer, and then it was resolved. And as far as I know, from then on, mother and daughter were fine. Mm-hmm. Like Finnish girl and father were fine. Priest and what makes me want to get back to this work, really wants to get back to this work, is that it only took an hour and a half.
Right.
Within obviously this wonderful context that we worked in. It only took an hour and a half.
Years of problems.
It was sorted. Yeah. It's not a case of, you have to go back to your birth. It's not a rite of passage. You don't have to go back that far always. Sometimes you don't have to go back nearly that far to resolve what needs to be resolved, to get things harmonious again. Because after all, what we're interested in is not archaeology. We're not interested in going back for the information and sake of it. We're interested in the current relationships being healing and harmonious relationships. That's what our lives are all about, is finding ways to make our lives with each other.
You still have to deal, you can find out what the problem is, so you still have to find solutions to deal with that problem, don't you? Because I've spoke to you many times, John, saying my younger days when I'm fighting and all that.
Yeah.
I know, I could relate it to my dad. I knew that.
Yeah.
But that never stopped me from fighting, knowing the reason why I was the way I was.
Yeah.
Violent and quick off the mark or whatever, John.
Yeah.
I knew it was down to my dad teaching me to fight growing up and be the way you was. But I never dealt with what the problems it was causing me, even though I knew.
Yeah.
So I didn't have the mechanism to deal with that, did I? Even though I was wise enough to know, that's the reason you done that.
Yeah.
And still, I had no mechanism, no help to deal with that. And that's what
Exactly.
you need. It's no good knowing the problem and leaving it, is there?
And of course, it's not just a mechanism. It's the way people are relating to you that matters. I keep on having to say this very often. I'm not just having to say it to you, but so much of the time these days, people talk about the virtue of being independent. It's bollocks. It's not natural. Primates are not supposed to be independent. We've had thousands and thousands and thousands of years of surviving by our relationship, by our ability to cooperate with one another. That's how we defeat the predators when we were in the jungle. We didn't defeat them by being, on our own. That's another interesting thing that Gene came up with about the tribes. He said they don't have champions. You don't have a champion spear thrower. We don't have a champion archer. We don't have a champion. They used to have wrestling matches, just two guys would get to, should we have a wrestle? But there wouldn't be a championship.
For fun, not to see who's the best.
But no, because what's the point of having one good spear thrower?
Right, yeah.
We lose him, we're stuck. We want everybody to be pretty good.
Yeah.
It just seems that we've got competition. To me, is a compensation. I wasn't valued. This is make me feel valuable if I'm better than you. Yeah. If I go around making sure I put you down and I'm okay, I'm going to feel okay. But strong people, inwardly strong people, don't need to do that. They don't need to bully people. They don't need to be one better than people. They don't need to put people down. They don't need to be the best tennis player even. They don't need to be the best violin player. I remember saying, when kids at school would say, "Are you a good tennis player?" I'd say, "I'm good enough to enjoy it." That's all that matters, really. And I remember I had a terrible time when I did drama at the girls' school. I didn't tell you about this yet. But yeah, when I left Frank, I went to a girls' school, thinking I was only going to be there for a term, but I ended up being there for 20 years. And I was asked to do the shows because I'd done shows, I'd been in drama at university. And I was made to be head. I always hated admin, but they made me be head of drama because there was nobody else. So I was head of drama, and they said you got to judge the drama competition. So I did, and the first year I did it, there were 3 houses. Everybody took part. I gave my judgment at the end, said which was the winning house, and that meant I had one house euphoric, one house a bit drab, and another crying their eyes out. What was the point of that? So after that, I didn't have any more drama competitions. We had a drama festival. And instead I gave prizes for scenery, prizes for makeup, prizes for the production thing, prizes for performances, all that kind of stuff. So that everybody got prizes. That's the way. That's the much more natural way to be. Winning out over other people is not really what it's all about. It's about the enjoyment of the activity and the relationship you have with the people you're doing it with.
Yeah, and it can be a lot of pressure for children to be the best.
Exactly, yeah.
And it should be just children, really, John. But I also believe that a healthy competition is good as an adult. Gives you incentive, doesn't it? And better yourself.
Only, I know we don't agree on this.
Yeah.
You and I don't agree on this. But I think that if you feel okay enough about you don't need that. It'll be a kind of a bonus. Well, great, thanks very much. But you don't need it. I mean, it's like when I played rugby, I played most of the time in the centre. I was 2 stone heavier than I am now. That doesn't mean I was a big burly guy like they usually are nowadays. But in my day, you didn't have to be really big, and I was fast and I could handle the ball well and time it and all that. So I used to like playing in the centre. But that meant that I would draw the opposition, to me, and then pass the ball out to my winger, who would then go over the line and score. I got much more satisfaction from that than I would have being him just running over the line, So it's being in the team I think gives you the satisfaction.
Camaraderie and all that. Yeah, I agree on that. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and what did you learn from working with Frank, and what have you gained, and what knowledge have you got, John, from working with Frank and now to what you want to bring to help people now? Because you want to do a little thing with your school, don't you? You're helping.
Oh yes, yeah.
You're doing that, aren't you, John?
Yeah. Well, that's to do what I want to do with our school, and then I wanted to expand to other schools. I hope is that people, when they leave school, will still be a part of the school community. And that, unfortunately, to some extent in the past, people have stayed connected with school and been brought back if they've been a big success. I want us to provide help and nurture for those who've not been successful, who maybe have struggled with their marriage or struggled with one of their kids who's in trouble or whatever. To be there in a real way as a community for people who've left the schools, and for that to be a provision that becomes something that all schools start to do, starting with ours. I've got talking to the chaplain about it next week.
Yeah, you are a community-based school, aren't you? And then when all of a sudden you're leaving school, going into the adult world, and you're losing that security you've had, that base you've got, haven't you?
Yeah.
And you want to carry that on and help ex-pupils, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's something I've particularly learned. But I think my main message is, well, we've moved on from that now. But what I also would love to do is get into a team myself again, where I can continue working like I did with Frank Lake, because I've still got the energy to do that. And I would love to be able to be in a team. You can't do it on your own. It's too, if you do therapy work and you're doing it kind of professionally and it doesn't cost you, I don't think you're doing it.
No. How many is ideal? 2, 3 people?
Well, minimum. I could do it if I was in the other one was, I think 3 would be good. 2 would be a starting point. If I got one other person to do it with, I would start like that. In fact, we're doing retreats. The chaplain and I we're hoping of doing them. I'm hoping we're doing retreats for people who left school who want support. We're going to call them relationship skills. So people don't feel they're coming for therapy; they're coming for help like that. So we're going to do relationship skills retreats, and that way we'll be able to hopefully reach out to those people. Yeah, and that will be me doing the therapy work again, which will be great. And I'll have the chaplain with me so that I won't be on my own, because you need someone sometimes to offload with. There were occasions when Frank and I would come to the end of a workshop that was particularly a heavy duty one, and you just feel you've been kicked in the stomach, it just felt, God.
Drained.
Yeah, absolutely drained. Yeah. And there were other times, I remember there's one particular time, I'm glad I've remembered this to tell you. He used to do a Holy Communion at the end of each 6-day workshop. We would have Holy Communion on a Sunday. We didn't have mainly, people in holy orders. We had people from all. When I worked for him, he was well known. I had a pediatrician. I had Jean Liedloff. I had a translator from UN. I had a businessman from Hong Kong who'd come all the way to do this with us. He came twice, actually. To complete his rebirthing experience. Right. He did it 2 goes, he said. Yeah. And also the plumber and other people like that, so
a wide variety.
Yeah, but when we had this at the end, we used to do a blessing. And I remember one time, this has really moved me, just by chance, I had a nun on one side of me who'd done a rebirthing thing, and a monk, both from Northern Ireland, by the way. And I was about to do the blessing where we all stand up and hold hands and say the blessing, and I got hold of their hands to pull them up to say the blessing. And I suddenly felt, it always moves me to say this, I felt this tremendous love coming through these people to me. It was just wonderful. They lifted me up.
All right. You wouldn't think they'd need therapy, would you? Like, would you?
But but that's another aspect of all this is that what was very moving in these workshops we did was to see people sometimes coming very haughty types, sometimes because they've been sent by the vicar said you better go, or the wife has told them, whatever it was, and it kind of quite haughty, but so much different by the end. They'd become much more humble, open people. I remember one guy who was a surgeon. And at the beginning, he was very much, the dignified chap, And at the end, his shoulders were kind of more relaxed. His face was glowing. He had quite a pale face at the beginning, but it was all warm and mellow. And his eyes were kind of looking at you, resting on you, rather than looking at you that way. It was just wonderful to see these little
physically
details.
Seeing it as well.
Yeah. So it was good, but all I was trying to say there was that as a therapist, you're vulnerable to the tough stuff that comes your way, but at the same time, you do gain a lot of love, and you're moved sometimes by people's honesty with themselves. Oh,
you gain a lot. You gain a lot of it yourself by doing it, don't you, John?
You
and
do.
You miss that, don't you?
I do. Definitely miss that. Yeah.
Well, hopefully this will help us, John. And said people want to contact us, and
and also maybe they'll hopefully they'll pick up on the books which I haven't brought today.
I'll get them to put a picture in it, John, and they can have a look at that, can't they? If they're interested. And I said if people want to have you come and say a few things and have a chat with anyway, they can contact us, can't they?
Can I just quickly explain the title of the main book that relates to all we've been talking about, which I wrote, which is called Why We All Need Therapy.
Okay, which I have read, John, haven't I?
For which I get, the three reactions are, one is total silence, the other is, this is opening a can of worms, I'm not going here, and the other one is, it all makes sense, John.
Don't know.
It all makes
well,
sense.
I was number 2, John, and after I read it was number 3.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to read it for a long time, did I?
Yeah, that's right.
I'd looked at it a couple of times and I thought, I'm going to read this now. It's going to make me think about past experiences, which I don't want to bring up. It's a long time ago. I don't want to delve that deep. I'm not bothered. My life's okay.
Yeah.
And then I read it, John. It was nothing like that. It was just made sense, John. It was basically telling people why they should have it and the benefits of it.
Yeah.
It didn't make me think about the regressive. You have to do that yourself, don't you? But the book's just explaining what you can get out of it.
And how kind of it all feels kind of natural when you're doing it. I mean, I remember we had a couple of midwives came, and they were kind of skeptical about it all. They were partly coming to see if they could discount it. This is rubbish, because they'd witnessed the lots of actual births. But they were amazed. They were saying they're moving exactly the way they would move in the birth canal. They're moving exactly the right way. We even had people who were the wrong way round, face to pubes, the wrong way. The face was the wrong way up. Right. And they checked and they found it was true. That's how it had been. Right. And that's why it can cause lifetime depression if you're not careful, that kind. Because, you're defeated. You can't get out. It can do. I'm not saying it does every time. I'm not trying to worry people. But it'd be something you can release and get rid of and be okay with, And
I think if you witnessed it yourself, maybe you'd be a lot more at ease yourself by doing it.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's not. It seems very kind of left field to some people, particularly these days where your image is important. If you're squirming around on the floor and you're a doctor or something, it's kind of. It's outside your comfort zone, say the least.
Yeah, very vulnerable, especially if you're with someone who you love and trust and they witnessed it as well. You'd have to, that'd be a worry.
Well, you don't have to do it that way for the first time, do you? You can do it. But the other thing is, again, I'm sorry I keep on going and going, but the other thing is I want to get to the point where we're all therapists, not we're all having therapy, we're all being therapists. That's why we all need therapy. Because we all need to know about therapy to do it for our partners, for our mothers, fathers, children, whatever. We all need to be able to move in and out of that space as the need arises. You know, if my headmaster's having a really stressful time, he should be able to come to me, and I would help him with it, you know, without it being unusual.
Right.
I'd like therapy and counselling and all that kind of thing to happen
Naturally,
you know,
you still need to
as a
be able
normal
to
part of
spot it
life.
and when to use it properly, don't you? You need to be able to, need some kind of training to be able to help someone.
Well, I'd like everybody to have that training.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it is just being loving, but of course you need some know-how as to, if you're dealing with other layers of stuff, you need to know about them and accept them and be ready to deal with them when they arise, you know. I mean, Frank did some therapy on a woman in a lift once.
Right.
The lift got jammed. She went into claustrophobic, you know, shock, and was basically going back into a birth situation. He rebirthed her in the lift.
Right.
Yeah, as far as I know, she was fine.
She's a lucky woman, free therapy.
Yeah. It was pretty amazing when I think a lot of my teaching, you know, with kids owes something to him, because I'll take some credit myself, but also for him too, that he would be able to sort of pick up on things in people quite easily and quickly. And I found when I was working with him, I could do the same. And when I left and went to work at the school, I found I was very good at casting kids in the right roles in the plays that we did.
And that was a natural skill you've got, is it? Is it something that you got better at it?
I just got, you know, I just was...
Learned.
You know, it brought it out in me, if you like, working with Frank.
Yeah. How many years ago did you work with Frank? Or is it? You don't have to tell me exactly.
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, he died. He died in 1982 or 3, I think. I left shortly before then.
Yeah,
it's a long time ago. But to me, it's not a long time ago.
No. And it's still as valuable now, the information, as it was then.
Well, that's right. I mean, I remember being a bit cross with one of my colleagues saying, "This in your references, there isn't much of recent date." I said, "Well, nothing much has changed."
Yeah.
People
still, the problems are worse.
People still get born the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, there's certain things that the hunter-gatherers knew, whatever it was, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, that we need to relearn.
And right now, John, it's more important than ever that people need help, and the generation that coming up with having mental health issues.
I feel so. Well, when my boys talk to me, I mean, my boys are okay because of, you know, we talked about it, but when my boys talk about their friends, you know, and how the difficulties they're going through, you know, that you just heart bleeds for them. You know, it's so hard for men at the moment. If this could get out, that you know, men have a reason for being like this. Please understand us a bit better, and just don't just mean that we're sort of ontologically, you know, because we've got a Y chromosome, that means we're bad. You know, it doesn't. There's something's gone on that's mucked us up, and that's why men and women aren't getting on the way they should.
Yeah, we're very lucky that our children are healthy and in good stead, John, because it's so difficult for these children growing up the last 20, 30 years.
Yes,
You know, I'm not saying we had it easy, John, your generation, my generation, but...
You see, women have the problem of the misogyny, and men have the problem of a word that nobody uses, which is misandry. What does that mean? Misandry.
What's it again?
It means hating... misogyny means hating women, yeah?
Yes.
And misandry is the opposite, hating men.
All right.
Nobody talks about that.
No, I've never heard that word, John.
There's probably a few of those around.
Yeah.
But we need to somehow find a way past that, because lives are being lost. As you and I are talking now, lives are being lost because people are not, you know, their role play, not their role play, their role in life is becoming so difficult for them to manage. You know, what's my purpose? What's my status? You know, all of that.
And then they go online and you see so-called people doing this and that, which they're not really doing in real life, are they, John? And then you've got all that pressure on and everything else.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, so much of what I see on Facebook is people presenting success all the time. Well, that's not much help to most of us who are not perfect.
No, and people that are struggling anyway, thinking that life's hard, and then they look at someone and it looks like they're having it easy.
Yeah.
It's not encouragement, it's not help, is it? It's more pressure on them.
Well, yeah, that leads on to another thing, is that more and more now with communications the way they are, more and more the people who have not can see the people who have and what they're doing, and the difference between them that seems to be growing in many circumstances. Yeah. Which leads me to the ending of the book ends with a poem. I don't know whether you remember the poem at the end of the book. It ends with what happened. I remember reading a book called On the Road to Kandahar, which is by a guy who said that in order for radical groups and these terrorist groups to get organized and to be able to function, they need a groundswell of resentment in an area. So they've got a kind of infrastructure, like a support group around them to build up. He in fact, the guy who wrote the book, I think he'd infiltrated one or two of these terrorist groups to work this out. They need that. So you're getting more and more with the modern world, this sense of they've got this and I haven't, they've got this and I haven't. The more and more knowledge of this situation is prevalent. And so I suggested one way in which we could start to alleviate that when I was watching the B-52 bombers take off from Fairford Airport. When those bombers took off, I had this vision. Instead of dropping bombs, they could drop little parachutes with aid parcels in them, water treatment, bits of food, medicines and stuff, and do what they call halo, which is high altitude, so stealth bombers, so hopefully they wouldn't get missiled, and low opening. So they come down, they open low down. And the vision in the poem is that you'd have like snow, these tiny parachutes coming down. Nobody's going to get hurt if one hits them on the head, but there's so many of them that people who want to sort of be greedy and grab them, I'm going to have, you get away, I'm going to have this one, you shove off. It'll be a waste of time because there's another one coming,
right,
and another one coming. So greed would become pointless. There's so much stuff. We could do that. We could actually do that. We could send stealth bombers over to any Gaza, anywhere. We could send them over and drop piles and piles and piles and piles and piles of aid. So much aid, wouldn't be as expensive as half the weaponry we send over. And, drop them all over the place. Yeah.
Never going to happen, John.
It would be a gesture. It wouldn't save the world, but it would be a gesture.
Yeah.
And it might be something that might just change people's attitudes a bit and make people take notice, as I hope they will, of this.
Yeah. Well, you've got a lot to say, John, about it. It's very important, isn't it, that people realise that therapy can help, John, and don't need to bottle that up, do we?
No. Well, that is the thing that makes us ill.
And I'm telling you this, and I won't have it, John. So I'm not talking. I find it very difficult myself, don't I?
Yeah.
I talk to you as a friend, John. That's how I get away with it.
Yeah.
I don't class it as therapy. I don't class it as getting help.
Yeah.
Because you're my friend. But that's what I get out of it, don't I? When I talk to you, John, I open up, and it helps me when I leave our time together.
Yeah.
I feel refreshed.
Yeah.
But I'd find it difficult if I called it therapy. And
still?
Yeah, still, John. After all this time we've been friends.
Right.
But that's how I deal with it, John. Yeah. But it does help me. It does. I get so much out of it.
Yeah.
But that's my mentality, isn't it?
You're not alone. I mean, I have students who, I do one-to-one work on, dyslexia problems and so on now. And some of them still feel it's a kind of a stigma to need help, but it's just nonsense, really. We're not designed. We're not tigers. We don't go around. We're wolves or primates. We're pack animals.
Yeah. And when I read Tyson Fury's book, I suppose that changed my mind on mental health. And I used to think very weak people that had mental health issues a long time. Then I read his book. And I
Whose book?
Tyson Fury's.
Oh, Tyson Fury,
And if a gentleman of that, of his nature,
Yeah.
could have a mental breakdown and want to commit suicide, and he had everything.
Yeah.
And it can happen to anyone. Everyone needs help, don't
Yes. Yeah, we just need a bit of humility.
I used to see it as a bit weak, didn't I, when I was younger? You don't need help. Just deal with it. Deal with your problems, that's what I used to say.
Yeah.
But, you know, it does help, doesn't it? A lot of people do need help.
Well, I mean, I'm glad I had therapy. I don't feel it's any kind of admission of weakness at all. You know, I just feel it gives me authority because it works.
Yeah. Just trying to think, any of my friends have therapy, John, and if they do, they don't mention it to me. So and I probably do. Chances are they do, don't they? But it's not talked about. Men don't talk about it. Or certainly don't. I don't hear about it.
Yeah.
So it still must be relatively kept to themselves.
Things like that need to change. Like we need to change the expectation of mums to, put their children in care, and we need to change attitudes in many ways to be more true to ourselves, our real selves, not the compensations we go in for. The entertainment industry kind of almost takes over your life if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. You're not living real life. You're presenting images. I don't want to get into that too much.
Well, is there anything you need? Anything else you want to say, John? Because I think we're all coming to the end. But is there anything you need to say about what we missed out?
The only thing I'd like to just mention finally is we've talked about my book, Why We All Need Therapy. And I just want to mention that if anybody is sufficiently interested to know more about John Fletcher, then you might like to have a look at his therapy.
And you've also got a novel as well.
His other books, which was, one is called I Will Give You a Year.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that, John.
Which is a novel which is about a healing relationship between a man and a woman. And the other one is called Out of the Ring of Fire, which in the first part is basically a book of poems which started when I was 18 through to the present day. And the first half is basically, kind of highly wrought, heavy-duty stuff. I really enjoyed
reading it, John. I didn't think I would, but I enjoyed reading the poems.
Did you?
Yeah, I really did. But I enjoyed the 3 books, John, which are all different, aren't they? But I got a lot out of them all.
Good.
So if anyone does want to read them, it'll be on Google, isn't it? It's on Amazon. Yeah. You Google John Fletcher.
Yeah, they're printed by a firm called Lulu, Lulu. That was one. And if you wanted the latest edition, it's best to go direct to Lulu for them. But
and we'll put the links. We'll put the links at the bottom of the YouTube channel. If anyone's interested, and as I said, and if anyone wants you to come and give a talk, John, they can contact me, can't they?
Certainly,
and you can. We'll sort something out for them, won't we?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, and I've really enjoyed today, John.
Yeah, so
very nervous I was, but really glad we did this, John.
I am very glad we did.
I really appreciate your friendship, John. You know that you mean the world to me.
Yeah,
I'm glad it's me and you doing this together, John.
I think it's just amazing the way we've got together.
Yeah, I think John. We're definitely not 2 peas in a pod, John. We're very different, aren't we? But that's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I gain a lot from our relationship, John.
Yeah.
Really mean that.
Yeah.
Glad you're part of my life.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
I love you, pal.
I feel the same. Okay.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.